Recently, if you've been around YouTube, especially within the gacha space, you've probably noticed a growing trend of a certain type of video being directed at Genshin Impact. And honestly, I think these videos say a lot about the current state of the game. And even more than that, they highlight a shift in the conversation surrounding Genshin Impact itself. A transition from what the conversation used to be to what it has become today. These videos are the I Quit Genshin Impact videos. Now right off the bat, I imagine a whole lot of people would immediately come to the conclusion that these are just Wuthering Waves players or content creators looking for another opportunity to bash Genshin Impact. But honestly, to a certain extent, that is not really true. I mean, yes, there are some content creators who specifically mention Wuthering Waves as the reason they decided to quit Genshin Impact. But when you actually look into many of these channels, what you quickly realize is that some of them are the furthest thing from Wuthering Waves channels. I mean, some are variety gacha creators who cover every major gacha game on the market, while others are not even gacha focused at all. And yet, across all these different creators, over the past several months, even stretching back up to a year or two, the idea of quitting Genshin Impact has become a recurring topic of discussion. It has become a point of genuine interest. So the big question is why? And I don't mean why would someone quit Genshin Impact. We could probably come up with a long list of reasons why a player might decide to leave the game at any point in time. No, what I mean is why now? Because if the answer is simply that Genshin Impact isn't your cup of tea, then let's be honest, Genshin Impact has not been everyone's cup of tea for quite a while now. That is not new development. So why are we suddenly seeing this growing desire to leave the game this many years into its lifespan? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. So if you're into this kind of content, make sure to like the video and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Why do you think we're seeing this sudden wave of I Quit Genshin Impact videos on YouTube? Do you think it's simply a coincidence? Do you think there is something deeper going on behind the scenes, or do you have an entirely different explanation? Let me know all that and more in the comments below, and of course don't forget to subscribe if you're interested on any of my future videos. Alright, let's get into it. See, the idea of seeing more and more people with at least the intention of quitting Genshin Impact is a very funny one, especially when you consider something I've said in many other videos before, that Genshin Impact has never seen more growth than it has over the last 2.5 to 3 years. I mean, really think about this. If you look back at Genshin's history, you realize that the periods where the game was at its absolute peak were also the periods where we observed the least amount of meaningful growth. I mean, from 2020 all the way to a large portion of 2024, one of the biggest requests from the Genshin community, and honestly the gacha community in general, was endgame content. The idea that the Spiral Abyss should not be the only endgame activity, especially when you consider the sheer number of characters the game continues to give its players. I mean, players wanted more places to use those characters, they wanted different challenges. And then on June 1st, 2024, we got that devs listen moment from Genshin Impact. For the first time in the game's history, we had actual new endgame content, the Imaginarium Theater. And regardless of whatever issues came with that endgame, regardless of whatever problems people had with it, or may still have with it today, the reality is that the game experienced significant growth. And really, ever since then, we continue to see the idea of growth associated with Genshin Impact. I mean, just a year and some change after the release of the Imaginarium Theater, we got yet another endgame, the Stygian Onslaught. And really, this meant in a single year, Genshin Impact had seen more noticeable growth than it had in the previous 3. And the growth did not stop with endgame either, no. I mean, whether you look at the animation, when playing something like the Varka story quest or the Linnea story quest, you can clearly notice that Genshin Impact has continued to raise the cinematic quality of its dialogue scenes. Or whether you look at the stories themselves, stories that have given us far more stakes. Stories that are focusing on the ideas that actually matter to us, the players. The situation surrounding the Fatui, the traveler's journey to fight their sibling, the sovereigns, the shades, information about the heavenly principles. These are things that the story is actively diving into right now. All things that are very different from how things used to be. I mean, in the past, many of the stories were far more self-contained. They were more intentional, more localized, and really often disconnected from the larger mysteries that players were actually wanting to learn about. And really, that is what is so interesting. I mean, with all this growth that has happened, all this growth that is clearly visible within Genshin Impact, a video like this still exists. And not only does it exist, but if the views and engagements of many of these I Quit Genshin Impact videos are anything to go by, then the sentiment they're trying to push is one that is shared by a surprisingly large number of people. And I believe the reason for this isn't some decision that was suddenly enacted or some sudden hatred that people developed for Genshin Impact. No. Instead, I think it is a veil being lifted. See, having been in the gacha content creation space, and by extension, the gacha community for as long as I have, one thing I've come to realize is that yes, players absolutely love the idea of growth within a video game, but not for the reason most people think they do. See, most people, and I would argue even a lot of gacha developers, seem to believe that simply changing a game, writing lines of code that improve certain features, or though that entirely new system is enough to get players excited and supportive of your game. And yes, that is a part of it, but I believe what takes the bulk of people's interest is what that change says about the possibility, or rather the probability of future change. The idea of entering a new region or a new version today, feeling excited to explore it, excited to experience the story, while also understanding that the next region and the next version would likely be an entirely different experience. It's understanding that if there are problems you notice in this region, they'll probably be addressed in the next one. Understanding that if there is a QOL feature that would have made this region more enjoyable or more player friendly, there is a good chance it will be added in the next region, or at least within the next few updates. That is what growth is. The work being done that you know will eventually find its way into the game, regardless of whether you're personally asking for it or not. That is what I believe earns the genuine appreciation of players. Because what players, whether they consciously realize it or not, have always associated with growth in a gacha game is not just the improvements they're receiving today, it is the confidence that those improvements will continue tomorrow. So the big question becomes, what kind of growth are we actually seeing in Genshin Impact? And this is where things get very interesting. Because yes, even if we acknowledge that there has been growth, significant growth in fact, what we also begin to understand is that this doesn't necessarily feel like growth designed for the benefit of players. It doesn't feel like the kind of growth players can look at, understand, and confidently expect more of in the future. But rather, it feels more like growth intended to keep players quiet. A kind of growth intended to have players understand that it can be done, it should be done, hell, it has been done, but who knows if it will continue to be done. And I think the proof of this comes down to two very significant factors. The first is the timing of these changes. I mean, it is not a coincidence that the period when Genshin Impact chose to grow was 2024. Not only the same year that Wuthering Waves released, but the same period where we were getting announcement after announcement about upcoming gacha titles. The same period where games like Arknights Enfield and Neverness to Everness were generating massive attention and preparing for release. And it just so happened that this became the moment where Genshin Impact decided to improve the game. I mean, this was when they worked on the wishing system, when they decided to give us a free yearly 5-star with each anniversary, and also, as said before, where they introduced the new endgame content. And players, whether they were Genshin fans or not, understood what this meant perfectly. They understood that the one period where they suddenly started receiving meaningful improvements was the same period where genuine competition existed. And more importantly, they understood that if the competition had never appeared, there was a very real possibility that many of these improvements would never have happened in the first place. Though maybe I could be wrong. Maybe everyone who thinks this way could collectively be wrong. Maybe all of these changes had been planned for years, and it just happened to be a massive coincidence that they were all delivered at the exact same times all of these announcements were happening, and all of these competing games were beginning to emerge. But even if we were to consider that to be the case, the second factor puts a complete stop to that confusion. The things that still haven't been fixed, like our good old friend, the skip button. And at this point, is there really an excuse? I mean, not only has it become a staple feature within the gacha genre, whether you're talking about non-Hoyoverse games like Arknights Enfield or Neverness to Everness, or even Hoyoverse own games like Honkai Star Rail and Zelda Zone Zero. But it is also a feature that would be incredibly relevant in a game like Genshin Impact, considering the sheer amount of story content, side quest and world quest that exist within it. But even beyond that, there are still situations that happen naturally within a gacha game where a skip button becomes absolutely necessary. I mean, imagine playing through one of those dialogue heavy quests that are a staple of this game, sitting through a particularly long conversation, finally getting close to the end, and then your connection times out, and you have to start all over again from the very beginning. I mean, I would be willing to bet that every single person watching this video has experienced something like that at least once. And unlike many other frustrations, this is the kind of thing that is completely outside the player's control. The exact kind of situation where a skip button should exist. Moving past that though, there is then the rewards problem. I mean, a while back, the Genshin Impact community attempted a boycott of the game, and while that whole movement ultimately went nowhere, what it did reveal was that there was a genuine frustration within the player base regarding the amounts of polls players received in each version of Genshin Impact. I mean, think about this. We are already at a point where a large portion of the free-to-play community has essentially decided that the weapons banner is not worth touching, at a point where most content creators would not even recommend pulling on the weapons banner as a free-to-play. And yet, even when players limit themselves to characters alone, pulling can still feel restrictive because the game generally averages somewhere around 65 to 80 pulls per version. And those aren't the only issues. I mean, there's the fact that stamina still decreases simply from running, the fact that many players still feel there aren't enough quality of life improvements within the game, the fact that numerous small improvements that could make the overall experience smoother and more convenient still have not been addressed. And when you look at everything that has been improved, the new animations, the new endgame modes, the visual upgrades, all of the growth Genshin Impact has undeniably received, it raises a very obvious question. Why have so many of these significantly easier changes been left untouched? Why have so many of these long-standing complaints remained unresolved? And honestly, we already know the answer. The player base have always known the answer. It's the same reason we're seeing complaints after complaints about Genshin Impact across social media every single day. The same reason we're seeing more and more I Quit Genshin Impact videos appear on YouTube. Because the conclusion many players have arrived at is that the growth we've seen in Genshin Impact wasn't genuine growth in the way we wanted it to be. At best, it was reactive. And while people have understood that for quite some time, what we're seeing now is them finally beginning to voice that understanding. But I think the more frustrating part of this entire discussion is what we see, especially from the pro-Hoyo crowd, whenever these complaints are voiced. I mean, let's be clear. No matter how many I Quit Genshin Impact videos are made today, or how many are made in the future, Genshin Impact is going to be fine. That is simply what it means to be the biggest gacha on the market. But the reality is that the existence of so many videos like these should still be a cause for concern. It should be something worth discussing, something worth analyzing, something that leads both communities and content creators to ask why so many people are arriving at the same conclusion. But instead, what we've seen is a level of discourse that has somehow devolved from something worse than what we've witnessed throughout most of Genshin's lifespan. I mean, as always, the blind positivity is still there. Most things Genshin does are still praised, and those rare moments where an actual boycott or a genuine pushback against the game's practice is attempted, they are still ignored by the game itself, just as they have always been. The difference though right now is that where every insult and every defense of Genshin Impact used to be directed at Tectone, these days it is increasingly directed at the Wuthering Waves content creators. And understanding why is easy. I mean, Wuthering Waves content creators are accessible, they're visible, they're easy targets. It is much easier to turn them into villains than it is to acknowledge that the complaints being raised might actually be legitimate regardless of who is making them. It is easier to pick a group, label them as biased, and dismiss everything they say than it is to confront the actual source of the frustration. The devs, the executives, the decision makers of the game, the same people who make promises they never keep, the same people who somehow find time to work on everything except some of the most requested conveniences. But why do that? I mean, doing so would require admitting that there are genuine problems with the game. It would require talking about what those problems are, and even more importantly, it would require admitting that many of these I Quit Genshin Impact videos, and perhaps even more controversially, many of the Wuthering Waves content creators making these arguments might actually have a point. And while I personally think that that would be a healthier outcome, for some reason I just don't see that happening. But that is just my opinion. What do you think? What do you think about the reason I've given as to why people are quitting Genshin Impact? And even more so, about the way people react to content creators who make videos saying they're quitting Genshin Impact. Do you think I've covered all the major points, or do you think there is something else that should be added to the discussion? Tell me that in the comments below, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.